Hello again, this is Bill Hall talking about this episode of the Bonhoeffer Show. And we're doing a series on, guess who? Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Remarkable man. And this particular session is called Bonhoeffer, Pastor, Spy, Traitor, Coward, all with question marks. Pastor, certainly he was a pastor to so many. But his pastoral life is not what he's known most for. A spy? He actually was a member of the German FBI, the Avoir it was called. And he was there because his brother-in-law was there and got him the position, which meant he didn't have to go into the army because now he's back in Germany. He's returned. It's 1939 late. The war has begun in Europe. And so now he has to become a double agent. He is now involved in a plot to assassinate Adolf Hitler. That's treasonous. So is he a coward? Is he brave? What is he? Well, that's the subject of today's show. And as you listen to it, I think you just really ought to know that Bonhoeffer was, here's a passage from my notes. He was a pastor without a church, a professor without a class. He was a double agent without an assignment, a single man without a home. And so what did he do? He spent a lot of the free time he had, because he wasn't activated. There were still some security issues for him. So he prayed and he worked on his magnum opus, Ethics. An interesting man. So more Bonhoeffer moments, more interesting things about him and about the Christian life. I hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to the Bonhoeffer Show with Bill Hull and Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Wait, I thought Bonhoeffer was dead. Who is Bill Hull? He doesn't sprechen Sie Deutsch, and he doesn't even like sauerkraut. Okay, this is Steve Simmons, and Bill paid me to say this. Bill Hull is tall, good-looking, well-dressed, and smells pretty good. He's written over 30 books. Not one of them is about Bonhoeffer. He went to Bonhoeffer's home in Berlin, and the woman in the front yard wouldn't let him in. He did lecture on Bonhoeffer at Oxford University. They eventually asked him who he was, and he was promptly thrown out. But, ladies and gentlemen, and all the others listening to this podcast, here he is anyway. The husband of Jane, a father, a grandfather, Bill Hull.
Hello, I'm Bill Hall. Welcome to another Bonhoeffer Show. I'm the host along with my co-host, Brandon Cook. And today we're continuing our series on Dietrich Bonhoeffer. How amazing that we're talking about Dietrich Bonhoeffer on the Bonhoeffer Show. Bonhoeffer today, we're going to talk about, we're walking through his life. We talked about his early life, and we've had a couple of other programs on that particular kind of part of his experience and his maturation. But today we're talking about Bonhoeffer after he returned to Germany, after he'd been to New York the second time, when he left there and he said, what is the will of God for me here and now? And that was to return to Germany. And when he returned to Germany, it was a fateful decision, because then we know that on April 5th, 1945, he was executed at a small prison called Flossenburg. But today we're talking about the years about 1939, the end of 1939, 1940 through about 1943, before he was arrested. And this is, we're entitling this Bonhoeffer, Pastor, Spy, Traitor, Coward, So being back in Germany meant that Bonhoeffer and his best friend and colleague Eberhard Bethge were together again.
And on June 19th, 1940, they were sitting in a cafe on the Baltic Sea when news arrived that France had surrendered. Everyone rose, hopped up on their chairs, and gave the infamous Nazi salute and began to sing "The Flag Held High," also known as the Horst Wessel song. Bonhoeffer joined in, shouting a triumphant "Heil Hitler!" That's amazing to think of Bonhoeffer doing a Heil Hitler. Bethge objected, and Bonhoeffer said, "Hey, are you crazy? Raise your arm." Later he explained to Bethge, "We will suffer far greater things. Let's not get arrested over a song." Bonhoeffer was back walking the razor's edge. He was already persona non grata. He applied for military chaplaincy, a good way to avoid being arrested, but yet not having to kill anybody in the name of the Third Reich. But his application was rejected. So he accepted a position in the Abwehr, the German equivalent of the FBI, a position arranged by his brother-in-law, Hans von Donning. And because of his friendship with Hans and with General Oster, a general and a deputy chief of the Abwehr, he would have a dual role as an Abwehr officer and a spy for the resistance, what is called a double agent. He also expressed an interest in a military coup, just for emphasis. At the same time, he was summoned for a medical examination and passed. It would only be a matter of time then until he would be drafted and he was announced or pronounced fit for military service. So he was banned from public speaking, and he couldn't even live in Berlin. Even a small gathering of students he had led was reported to the Gestapo. At the end of his speech, students arrived and broke up the meeting. One person who was baffled by Bonhoeffer's clandestine lifestyle was Karl Barth. Karl Barth, as you know, was the most important theologian in Europe in those years. He also had been a great influence on Bonhoeffer in the latter part of Bonhoeffer's life, where Luther had been much of a bigger influence in the formative years of Bonhoeffer. But Barth just couldn't figure out what a pacifistic evangelical monk was up to. How was it that a professed anti-Nazi beset with various bans and restrictions and the most persistent voice of the confessing church would have been in a position in the military intelligence? The answer was very much Bonhoeffer. He had connections. This is a thing that's a consistent thread running through Bonhoeffer's life. As a member of the aristocracy, he had connections. And because he was clergy, he could walk both sides of the street. His motives were to escape war, but that would be impossible. He would get his hands dirty no matter what. The question he was really facing was, who do I kill? I must kill someone. Will it be Hitler, Himmler, and his henchmen, or will it be Russian soldiers? As Bonhoeffer was to begin to both believe and say during those days, it's better to do evil than to be evil. It's better to kill Hitler than to be Hitler. I guess that would be my interpretation. Killing Hitler would be doing evil. This was his pacifistic doctrine. But Hitler was evil incarnate. Some even, like Barth, saw the cowardly side of Bonhoeffer's position. It goes something like this: a pacifist will not act against evil in a violent way, but they will pray for anyone or everyone who will strike down evil and die in order to keep them free to be a pacifist. This to some is highly immoral and not at all what the Bible teaches. How God managed the Israeli army in taking the Promised Land does present a major problem for the pacifistic position. At some point, the question becomes, should we allow the strong evil leader with the best army destroy other nations, take away their freedom, and subject their people to the tyranny of every kind? In the 20th century displayed this. Even an idealist like Bonhoeffer had to admit that there was a limit to the pacifistic doctrine. There was a line that you cross. when action has to be taken. So suddenly Bonhoeffer was thrown into the secular existence with a non-clergy role. He no longer was writing sermons, preparing lectures, coaching pastors, and with his desire to create a spiritual nobility, an elite class of theologians who could be retrofitted to any and every national emergency, all that faded into the background. Ironically, Bonhoeffer had to establish his Aryan descent for final clearance with the Obvar. His mother, Paula, did the paperwork, and periodically Bonhoeffer would send his laundry home to be clean. Now, this is part of the, I suppose, the irony of Bonhoeffer, that he was a grown man. He still, though, depended largely on his parents as a single grown man, and especially financially. He was a pastor without a church, a professor without a class. He was a double agent without an assignment, and a single man without a home. While he waited, he read, he prayed, he worked on his magnum opus, Ethics. He spent evenings at the opera and during down moments wrote about his life and even his body. Here's what he wrote. It gives you a little bit of an insight into it. Bodily life is meant for joy. Eating and drinking are not only sustains bodily health, but also the natural joy of bodily life. Clothing is not only a necessary covering for the body, but an adornment as well. He believed, Bonhoeffer wanted to dress well. Relaxation and leisure not only facilitate the capacity for work, but also grace the body with the measure of rest and joy that it's due. In its essential distance from all purposefulness, play is the clearest expression that bodily life is an end in itself. So Bonhoeffer was concerned, though, about the separateness of his body from his spirit. In October, when the waiting was over, the Obvar granted the so-called UK status, or indispensable to state security, and thereby he was exempt from military service. His role would be as a courier, assigned to engage in covert talks with foreign church leaders who would communicate with Allied leaders. This was the work the resistance really wanted him to do. The official instructions were to represent the Third Reich to churches around the world. He began to travel widely during late October 1940 until 1943. His mind now went to more secular issues. His thought and wrote about wide cultural issues and ethics. And so his change in writing here was because he was now thinking about outside the church. He was thinking about the world that he lived in, the secular age that was coming upon Germany. And he realized his future was in the secular world. He spoke of religionless spirituality, meaning a rebirth of spiritual health through a new monasticism, nothing like the old church-based one. And he says this, again, such good insight into him. My recent activity, which has been predominantly in the worldly sphere, it gives me plenty to think about. I'm amazed that I live and can live for days without the Bible. I should feel it to be autosuggestion, not obedience, if I were to force myself to read it. I understand that such autosuggestion might be and is a great help, but I would be afraid in this way of falsifying a genuine experience and ultimately not getting genuine help. When I open the Bible again, it is new and wonderful as never before, and I should just like to preach. I know that I only need to open my books to hear what can be said against all this. In other words, he says, I know this is going against my own teaching. I have had much richer times, but I feel how my resistance against everything religious grows. Interesting statement. Often it amounts to an instinctive revulsion, which is certainly not good. I'm not religious by nature, but I think continually about God and Christ, authenticity, life, freedom, and compassion. I recall William F. Buckley, who was a famous writer and the founder of National Review magazine. Even in his 20s, he wrote God and Man at Yale, which predicted the liberalization and the walking away from God at Yale University. He said, as when asked about why are you a conservative, he said, I'm a conservative by doctrine, but I'm not of the breed. In other words, culturally, he didn't seem to fit. And I can identify with that, with the evangelical world. I can identify and understand what Bonhoeffer's talking about, that he was a conservative in the sense of theology in that time in Germany, but at the same time, he was not bred to be that. He was bred for the aristocracy, for a more liberal understanding of life and a more secular kind of life, which he could fall into rather easily. He says here that you cannot command emotion. Emotions are like three preschoolers. These are my words. You cannot command emotion. Emotion are like three preschoolers crawling under the pews at a formal wedding. Emotion is a product of ideas and images. Ideas as concept, images as picture in the brain that express that idea, such as you say, I want to be contemporary. I want to be quote unquote cool. Okay, so there's an image that goes with cool. It's a car, it's clothes, it's glasses, it's the look, it's the effect. It's all these kinds of things. And I think that Bonhoeffer is saying that he falls into secularity rather easily. It's almost second nature to him. Now, we're going to talk about all this, Brandon and I, just in a moment. But before we do that, let us do this. Let's hear about some opportunities with the Bonhoeffer Project from our stellar announcer, the man with the golden voice, Steve Simmons.
The Bonhoeffer Show is brought to you by the Bonhoeffer Project. As Bill said, the Bonhoeffer Project turns leaders into disciple makers. Jesus calls us as his disciples to make more disciples. But why should we make disciples? What are disciples? How does one make disciples? And who should join us? If you are interested in accomplishing what you agreed to do when you decided to follow Jesus, then inquire at thebonhoefferproject.com. You may qualify to become a member of one of our cohorts. The Bonhoeffer Project has cohorts spread across the U.S. and in several countries of the world. And remember to subscribe to The Bonhoeffer Show by going to the website, thebonhoefferproject.com. There you'll see the Bonhoeffer Show button. Click it and subscribe. Or go to iTunes, then type in The Bonhoeffer Show. And now, back to you, Bill.
Well, thank you, Steve. Well, here we are with Brandon Cook. And Brandon, we're talking today about Bonhoeffer. You know, kind of what was he? He was all these things. He was a spy. He was a pastor. He was a traitor to some. He was a coward to others. So these are some of the characteristics of Bonhoeffer. These are some of the accusations against Bonhoeffer. And so instead of lionizing everything about him, let's talk a little bit about and analyze what's going on in Bonhoeffer's soul via his actions and attitudes. Let's talk about his practicality and his spirituality. Let's try to put ourselves into his position. And he's sitting in a cafe in the Baltic Sea. France has surrendered to the Nazis. Everybody jumps up on their chairs and gives the Nazi salute and sings the Horst Wessel song. And Bonhoeffer says, this is no time to split hairs. Let's just do the Heil Hitler. Let's sing the song and finish our coffee and go to the opera tonight, and we'll deal with this other stuff later. So kind of what's running through your mind when you hear a story like this?
Well, I think it's one thing to give the Heil Hitler because you want to go to the opera. It's another thing to give a Heil Hitler because you have a larger term picture of resistance, which could get interrupted by being caught for not giving the Heil Hitler. So, you know, at this moment, what are his motives? Are his motives, I'm going to do this. I'm going to give the Heil Hitler so that I can survive, so that I can resist the regime. You know, I got that sounds wise to me. And I'm reminded of Jesus' words, be gentle as doves and wise as serpents, or shrewd as serpents. And I think, shrewdness can be next to godliness. and our principles can get in the way of what's appropriate, of what's shrewd and right. I actually had a teacher, speaking of Nazi Germany in high school, who said you should never lie, never ever lie. And I didn't have the wherewithal at the time to say, well, what if a Gestapo officer is asking you if you're hiding a Jew? Is it okay to lie then? Well, the moral answer to that would be yes. But your principles can get in the way in that moment. And at that point, your morality really has to do with your own individualism than it does with caring for others. In Judaism, you're always allowed to break Torah if it involves protecting another person or saving a human life. And so I would imagine that was what was going on for Bonhoeffer, a breaking of the moral law for a larger moral purpose, which unfortunately life is just that complex.
So Bonhoeffer is, when he was in New York the first time, when he was like 22 years old, he becomes a pacifist, or he becomes a pacifist with training wheels. He sees All Quiet on the Western Front, the movie, which is an anti-war movie. He also is with Jean Lesueur, the Frenchman, who taught him about pacifism. And he became, a pacifist, and he fell in love with the Sermon on the Mount and its teaching. And now he's having to struggle with this pacifism. Now, some people say, the pacifists say he's not really a pacifist and he was a traitor. Some people say he was a traitor to the fatherland because he, at one time, supported military action and his country. But now he's a turncoat. Even Bishop Heckel, his name was, said that he was a turncoat, a traitor to the German people. And so now he's sort of caught between, better to do evil than to be evil. Where do we draw the line? How do we draw the line on this issue of violent being nonviolent, war, peace, circumstances? How would you analyze him?
How would I analyze Bonhoeffer? How can you judge him? It's hard to judge someone in the situation and the context that he was in. Pacifism to me, I think, every Christian should be a pacifist in the sense of that's the vision of the kingdom. Plowshares into swords into plowshares, and a peaceable kingdom. Mm-hmm. So, but we'd have to get our Mennonite brothers and sisters on the line here. I think to get deep into pacifist thought, which I don't, obviously this breaks down around just war theory. What is a just war? When is it immoral to abstain from an act of assassination as Bonhoeffer engaged? I don't know these answers. I don't know. I know Greg Boyd, whose opinion I value highly. He's a pacifist, and I know that he addresses this question of, are pacifists basically, taking up the benefit of living in a liberal democracy that has secured rights through armed, through military intervention, without taking up the duty of investing in that intervention. And I don't know all the moral philosophical theory behind it, but I would just say, so all I can say is I'd have a hard time judging Bonhoeffer. And to me, it seems like an act of courage to be willing to confront evil and to try to save literally millions of lives. It doesn't strike me as it strikes me as an act of courage. But I'm not some sort of, but it leaves the question, what would happen if Christians were fully committed to living into pacifist ideals? What could that create on the earth? And I think that's an interesting question. So I don't have an answer. I just have ruminations. What do you think as you look at Bonhoeffer?
I think these are very complicated, treacherous waters, is what I think. I agree with you that we should live when somebody, I've always kind of separated it this way. If on a personal level, if somebody is going to ridicule me, even hit me, knock me down, whatever, for being a Christian, I'm willing to take it. I'm in that space, that Sermon on the Mount space. If you hit my wife, now I'm out of that space. If you hit my little kid, I'm out of that space. If you come after me with a gun or come and break into my home, I'm going to defend myself. To me, these are just common sense things. So I think common sense has to come into play. And I also believe that pacifism is a wonderful goal for the human race. At the same time, though, I think that one of the reasons that pacifism has permission to exist is because it's never adopted by that many people. And so the larger part of a culture usually is run by, and the power levers are held by, non-pacifistic people. And so I think that's the reason they can all coexist. I don't know if, and I might be displaying my ignorance here, if that I can remember any nation that's tried to live out the pacifistic position. I think that groups of people certainly have, and I'm not here to say they were wrong, but I am here to say that would be very, very difficult to do in the light of some of the great cruelties of the human race. So, but I think that that's something that we'll leave unresolved. But what I'd like to think about as well is this issue of kind of leaving the clergy worldview and going into a more, his religionist Christianity idea. Now, I understand, a lot of people, it depends on where you are on the theological spectrum, what you do with this religionist Christianity and how much you want to beat up the church. But I think that what he's really talking about, and of course, the German Lutheran church at that time was quite corrupt and very compromised with the Nazis and fascism. And that was a big problem. And that's what he was dealing with. And that's behind a lot of what he's talking about. But what I'm thinking about is religionist Christianity. When he was in prison and he was writing about these things, which we'll talk about in the next program, it's really addressing an issue of how, the church is wrapped in one kind of Christ, the cosmic Christ, so to speak, that overrules and it overarcs all of the world. That particular manifestation of Christ can wear several different costumes or garbs. And he's saying that this is what it's like, this is what Christianity has been like wearing the church garb in Germany. Let's get out of that garb and get into a different garb. Because out here in the secular world, that's not going to work. So what needs to work is something else. And he was seeking that something else. And that's what I think he was talking about. But
well, I think also just developmentally for everyone, I think for anybody who's trying to live a spiritual life, you come to a point where you're disaffected with religion, with the institution of religion. That's actually part of the process of authentically owning your faith. Mm-hmm. And Jesus was critiquing the religious structures of his day. The prophets critiqued the religious ritualistic system of their days. And so this is a natural part of that critique can be a sign, if it's not just born out of judgment, that you're developing spiritually, is to actually, the only way you have an authentic faith is by separating yourself from the religion you were born with, or that you accepted simply as a matter of tradition. Mm-hmm. And so it makes sense to me that Bonhoeffer, obviously he was living under there was much to be critiqued that was blatantly corrupt. But I think we can also, for all people, recognize that that's one of the patterns of spiritual development, is that growing dis-ease with the system of faith, that at some point you should be transcending the system that you inherited.
Okay, there's one other thing I want to bring up, and that is his insights about staying away from the Bible and prayer.
Uh-huh.
And he could go for days without. So what thoughts do you have about that?
I don't know. I think, wasn't it Jack? I think Jack Hayford said, I'm the kind of guy who I'd rather have a long bath every few days than a short shower.
Yeah.
Every day. I think spiritual practice really a lot of it comes down to temperament and personality. And so I don't know that there's a right way to engage spiritual practice, but it sounds like that was something that Bonhoeffer judged himself for. He said, I should be more religious, by which I think he means, devoted, religious in the devoted sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But again, I went through a period of life where I couldn't read the Bible at all because every time I would read the Bible, it brought up internal judgments about how I wasn't doing enough and how it brought up all my sort of negative religious associations. I actually had to have a period away from the Bible so I could return to it and read it with fresh eyes. And so I don't think we can make any hard and fast rules. There may be a time where it's appropriate to put scripture away, come back to it. There may be a time where that would be a lack of discipline. And I think that's what's that's why life takes nuances, because you have to discern what it is. But it sounds like Bonhoeffer was more wrestling with his maybe a lack of discipline, or something that he assessed as a lack of discipline within himself.
Yeah, or his mind being preoccupied with the immediate. I remember what Dallas Willard, and I never really got into this contemplation aspect, silence and solitude. I mean, I believe in silence and solitude. I spend an awful lot of my time alone. And it's not hard to spend time alone now. I mean, I heard half the people in Sweden live alone. That's a remarkable stat.
That's wild.
Yeah. And so all those people are just, they're it's the winter time, and they have the coronavirus now is ramping up over there. That should be a very difficult time for those people. But what Dallas Willard would talk about is that you would spend time with God in solitude and silence. And he said, don't take any books, don't take anything to write on, don't take a Bible, don't take anything. And just go out there and take a walk and spend time alone. And don't have an agenda. And don't think about anything.
Just be present.
And when I hear that, I go, wow. But I do believe that there's value in that, because, almost everything I do every day, all day long, is I consult what other people are thinking. And this is particularly true now, that everything is about, accessing what's on the internet, reading books, citing sources, doing all these kinds of things. People who are familiar with books and writing like us, that's the way we conduct our lives. And just making decisions all by yourself, like this morning, I made a decision this morning that I didn't consult anybody on, and I just was a gut decision, and I made it. And it wasn't a big decision, but it was a decision I made. And I just trusted my gut. I wasn't trying to, I said, I'm not going to try to please anybody with this decision. I'm just going to make it. And I did. And I thought that's sort of what, that's an honest kind of decision. So anyway, it's time to take another break and hear from Steve about how you might be involved with us and some of the things that we have to offer in the Bonhoeffer Project. So we'll be back with you in a moment.
If you want to go deeper into Bill's and the Bonhoeffer's teachings, go to www.thebonhoefferproject.com. There you'll find videos, books, and other resources that present both the problem and the solution to the disciple-making challenge facing today's Christian community. You can join a cohort or read Bill's and other Bonhoeffer Project team members' blogs and connect to Bill's books and articles. Remember to subscribe to The Bonhoeffer Show. Go to iTunes and do it today. We need to hear from you so Bill can answer your questions. All of Bill's answers are guaranteed to make you better looking. lose 10 pounds, and the IRS to write you a very big refund check. Well, not really, but you get the idea. Now, back to the King of Culture for critical analysis of whatever crosses his mind. Take it away, Bill.
Welcome back, everyone. We, in this segment, we want to talk about, just some observations about living in the age of Corona. And I just think that there's some things that we just want to interact about. The first thing is how has this changed our lives? And I just thought I would start with how it's changed my life. And my life, first of all, it's just essentially cut out any travel. So I've had to cancel several trips, and so as a result of that, I've had to eat a lot of those airline tickets. So I have the promise from the airlines with no change fees that I can go on these trips later for the value of the ticket. That's good. I hope that by the end of within a year that I'll feel free to travel and that meetings will be held, but we don't know that this is going to be the case. So another way that I've been thinking is how I'm going to have to recalibrate what I do. Now, I'm primarily a writer and a teacher, and I can do a lot of that online, and I have. Instead of going to a conference, I record the messages, I send it to them on my phone, and they work them up, and then they play them to groups of people. It's remarkable. I kind of like that. There's other areas that my wife and I really like each other, so we get along, and we live in a smallish house. I mean, it's about 1,325 square feet. We live in a beach bungalow near the ocean in Long Beach, California. We're thankful for that. And we live a life that's relatively simple, but I always like to run out and get things that I want when I want them. And now we have to plan more. And yeah, there's all that. There's the concern about our families. We have children that we aren't able to see. Our grandchildren we're not able to see right now except through the internet on Zoom or whatever. And so there is communication on that, and the telephone, of course. So, yeah, that's changed our behaviors a little bit, but it's reaffirmed just how much being in love with somebody and being comfortable with them really does matter. Because I know that domestic violence is going up. I know that in the state of Indiana, just for example, they normally get about 1,000 calls a day on their hotline for a variety of issues such as domestic violence, suicide, depression. Now it's 25,000 a day. That's startling. And so, being cloistered together is really great in some ways. In other ways, it's very, very challenging for people. And we don't have the little rugrats running around like Brandon does. And so, Brandon, how has this affected your life and maybe your longer-term thinking about what you're going to be doing now? You have been a pastor for over 10 years. You're transitioning out of that role, and now you're going to be moving more into where, as John Wesley said, the world is my parish. So essentially, how is this changing your thinking? This all coming, this one transition was going to be challenging enough, but now you have this big thing going on that's really being transformative to life in general.
Yeah, it was weird for me because I was already planning a transit. I'm in the middle of a transition. My last Sunday is April 26th. It's the 8th of April 2020 when we're recording, but I'm already out of the saddle for all intents and purposes. And so that's I'm in a double transition boat. I'm in the boat with everybody's in right now. I'm thankful that I have some financial solvency because of some transition money in my job, and for the foreseeable, for a period of months, I'm going to be okay. But for people who I'm grateful that I don't know where I would be if I didn't have that financial stability. I'm providing, my wife and I are providing for a family of 4. So I'm in a place of peace right now, and I'm enjoying, there's aspects of family life. I'm enjoying, the aspect of this that I'm enjoying is more time with my family. It'd be interesting if I didn't have kids. Yeah, it might be a little bit of an introvert's paradise on a purely individual level. But certainly, I've got to do some fundraising for this ministry that I'm launching, and I don't know what a terrible time to do that. So it gets to be a practical crucible for trusting that what we need is going to be provided, and I don't just mean materially, but materially as well. But this is a crucible for all of our souls, and to have the best part of us refined, and to find spiritual practices during this time that can endure far after this time is over. So we're trying to look at it through that lens and that perspective. And but yeah, it's wild to go through something. It's wild to watch the entire world go through something together.
Yeah, this is the first time I think I ever have experienced anything like this, with all the communications, and then that way we know what's going on all over the world.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm in it right now. I think trying to maintain or committing to maintain a attitude of thanksgiving and just curiosity and being present in the moment. Again, I just keep remembering the most important thing is to remember the most important thing. And that changes from situation to situation and moment to moment. But that keeps me, I'm trying to learn, I'm continuing to learn the discipline of staying present in the moment.
Yeah. Even when I travel, I've traveled millions and millions of miles. And one of the things I would always do is I'd land somewhere and I would be there 4 days, 5 days, and I just couldn't wait to leave. And I wasn't enjoying what I was actually doing. I was just really kind of enthralled with the idea of finishing what I was doing. And so I realized this about myself, and so I had to coach myself up to enjoy the moment, enjoy the day,
Present, yeah.
Be fully in this and have a good time. And instead of, today we're doing 4 programs, instead of how great it's going to be when we're done, enjoy actually doing it. The joy is in the doing it.
Yeah.
Not in finishing it.
You mentioned the Sermon on the Mount, and I think in large part that's the message of the Sermon on the Mount. Be here right now. Don't worry about tomorrow. Be present in the moment. Trust God in the moment. Why worry about tomorrow? It's a very, if you know Buddhism, it's a very Buddhist. The Sermon on the Mount has some overlay with Buddhist thought. And this idea of mindfulness, of surrendering anxiety and worry, and just being present with God. And this is an opportunity for all of us to learn the Sermon on the Mount in an entirely new way.
One last thing. What I've noticed is that the capacity of humans to actually get along when it really matters to them to get along. For example, the way that, again, this is not political, what I'm about to say. It's only marginally political.
I'll believe it when I hear it.
Yeah. Well, it's like, Donald Trump is working with the governors. There's 50 governors. And it hasn't been without its issues, but largely Democrats and Republicans, people from different worldviews are laying aside their differences in order to deal with this. And we've heard about this before. In the time 9/11, there was a brief period of time like that. World War II, there was a period of time like that. I think when the nation has had to come together, and even the world has come together, What do you think it is in the human capacity, Brandon, that causes people to lay aside their differences, even disdain for one another, and actually see the good in others? I mean, Donald Trump is not known for complimenting very partisan. I heard him, just blessing, saying wonderful things about Bill de Blasio, and there couldn't be, who is the mayor of New York, a person quite different and normally quite at odds with Donald Trump, yet Trump saying nice things about him, and saying he's doing a great job, things like that.
Well, I don't know about, I don't know why, Trump, I hazard to, angels fear to tread to diagnose President Trump's statements. But I resonate with, that's the best part of our humanity, is when we're encouraging one another. And I saw a video that it actually made me weep. It caught me off guard. It was on John Krasinski's Some Good News. He started this podcast, fake news show, just doing good news. And they showed a video of people, I think it was in New York, turning the lights on to their apartment on the skyscraper. So the lights are coming on the skyscrapers and people are cheering for the medical workers. And it was this sense of we're all in this together. And it made me weep, I believe, because that I have felt so absent from that in our culture. That there seems to be such polarization, such lack of being on the same page. Maybe times of crisis, the gift of that is they bring us together. They give us some perspective on what really matters. And then when we lack that perspective of what matters, we find ways to fight with each other to try to find some sort of meaningful narrative. And maybe that's why Trump talks about de Blasio in a positive way, or why we have an opportunity to find our best part of us, is that we can actually see what matters. Maybe that's also part of the gift of this crazy time and pandemic, is that we could see that. Now, the trick would be to actually have that become not just a practice, but a habit, that outlasts this time. That's, I think, a worthy goal. Maybe feels a little too much to hope for.
Well, even if we could keep, if we're at 10% of being able to do that, maybe we go to 20%.
That'd be something.
Yeah, maybe a 10% gain would be good. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that I would think it would be, the more Christ-like the country can become, the better. That's my view. Well, so there's, and I think one of the things it makes me weep. It really touches my heart is what a great country we live in. Just with all its faults, somehow the truth finally all comes out. Things like that. And that's not a political statement, but, you look back at what happened 30 years ago, or, we don't have the same problems that some closed societies have, where you never really find out the truth. And I think that, but there's some good, solid, foundational qualities. And what geniuses the men were who essentially wrote the Constitution. And somebody it was funny how they said England was founded by the church, basically, and by a group of religious people, and became secular. And the United States was founded by secularists and became religious. But I think the underpinning of our founding fathers was an assumption about God and some greater power, and certain inalienable rights that were granted to us by the divine, even though many of them were deist. So anyway, I find that great. I think it's something to celebrate and be thankful for. And so, ladies and gentlemen, though, if you want to get very specific, instead of reason, there's revelation. If there's revelation, there's Jesus, the apex of all revelation. And if we follow him, we'll learn everything he ever needs to teach us. Everything we'll ever need to know, we learn from Jesus. And so until next time, stay safe.
Well, we hope that the show wasn't too bad. Jane Hull wants everyone to know that if anything Bill said was offensive, she feels your pain. If you were upset by anything Bill and his guests said, well, mission accomplished. At the Bonhoeffer Show, we value irreverent, satirical, and generally inappropriate behavior. But when it comes to fulfilling the Great Commission, we don't mess around. Remember, subscribe. We promise. No private jets, no white suits, and definitely no toupees.